I'm going to welcome. Welcome to Zeitgeist, Spirit of the Time. We are so happy to have you on this Friday afternoon in August. So excited to have Phil Hettema with us today. We will get started right at 12. So just a few minutes. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today with Zeitgeist Spirit of the Time with Phil Hettema. We will get started right at 12. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We are so excited to have our 15th passenger, none other than Phil Hettema. We'll get started in just a moment. For those of you just joining us, welcome. Welcome to Zeitgeist Spirit of the Time. Today, we are so excited to have passenger Phil Hettema with us, and we will get started in about 3 minutes. Again, for those of us just joining, thank you so much for being with us on this Friday. We will get started momentarily. Welcome to those who are just joining. We are here with Phil Hettema today in our time machine. We will blast off in about a minute. Thank you to everyone who is joining us today on this Friday, August 19th. As we fly with our passenger, Phil Hettema, we will get started very shortly. All right, welcome to Zeitgeist Design and Production. I'm Becky Kiefer, Studio Director. Time travel is the ultimate guest experience. In fact, it's probably the most immersive and interactive attraction ever imagined. And here in the Zeitgeist Creative Studio, aka RNJ's Time Travel Emporium, imagination rules and time is always of the essence. This is where location-based entertainment gurus Ryan Harmon and Joe Lancicero study the past and spin the present, envisioning the future of UXIRL, user experiences in real life. The Spirit of the Time Zoomcast offers a sneak peek behind the themes. And each month, we move you without a ride system, inviting one incredibly talented and accomplished colleague aboard our time machine. We set the controls for milestone moments in that person's career, attempting to unravel the mystery of what makes a guest experience timely yet timeless. And because we're live, you can tap in to our questions by just chatting them in our Q&A chat box, and our passenger will answer them in an off-the-record Q&A right after the show. So climbing aboard our time machine today is 40-year-old industry icon and recipient of the Themed Entertainment Association's Lifetime Achievement Award, Phil Hettema. Phil is Chief Executive Officer of THG, where his notable projects have included One World Observatory in New York City, the High Roller Observation Wheel in Las Vegas, and Beyond All Boundaries at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. But Phil may be best known as the former Senior VP of Attraction Development for Universal Studios theme parks worldwide. For 14 years, he oversaw the creative development of classic experiences like Terminator 2 3D, Jurassic Park, The Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man, Backdraft, and many more. He also oversaw the master planning of 5 Universal parks, including Universal's Islands of Adventure. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our time machine pilots, Zeitgeist President and Chief Creative Officer, Ryan Harmon, and Zeitgeist Executive Vice President and Chief Art Director, Joe Lancicero, along with the tall, cool one himself, Mr. Phil Hettema.
Yeah, here we are.
All right, that was so cool.
Yeah, what a summer, 1984. We just returned from 1984, actually a few days back. It was
August 12th.
and it was the closing ceremonies of
The 1984 Summer Olympics here in LA. And we did this because, Phil, we know you worked on this with Daniel Flannery, and we just wanted to
experience it firsthand. I mean, it was one thing watching it on TV.
I know.
There
But the flying saucer was so cool. And the fact that everybody had flashlights, I don't know if that's been done prior to that. I don't know. I know they copied
yeah, it
that
was
since
super
then,
cool.
but
Wow.
super awesome. We want to hear all about that.
And everything else in your career. I just want to start, but let me take off these stupid glasses for a second.
Protection.
This trip has special meaning for me. I admired Phil through his entire career, followed everything he did. Our paths would cross occasionally. And then at the end of my career at Disney, my next stop was at the Hettema Group. And I was actually ahead of for a while, and actually got to work directly with Phil and experience why he's great. I mean, besides being one of the most talented people I've ever worked with, he's just an incredible human being.
Yeah.
And so it's so great to have you here today, Phil. And I'm going to stop blabbering.
Well, you were probably still working on Mickey's Toontown. I left Disney, and Phil picked me up almost immediately, and I got to work on what became Islands of Adventure when it was still Toon Lagoon, and we're going to hear all about those stories as well.
Okay, so let's start the time machine.
So we are going to start today. We're going to set the time machine to July 17, 1955.
Where are we?
Which is the day Disneyland opened. Phil, why are we here?
We are here because I'm like 7 months old, and Disneyland and I kind of opened the same year. And it really, I think, was one of the seminal events that would affect my life, because I grew up in Pasadena, and every year my family would make its pilgrimage to Disneyland. And I became I was the nerdy little creative kid, and it was like the high point of my year every time we visited. I memorized every word of every guidebook, could tell you, read the Disney news, ordered my A, B, C, D, and E tickets. And it really became like the most special place in the world to me. And it's really a testament to be careful what you wish for, because I never would have imagined that great experience I had as a kid would turn into my life's work. So I'm a super lucky guy.
Yeah. So if we move forward about 16, 15 years, it looks like here we are at Pasadena High School, and you are kind of going in a musical direction.
Yeah. Probably the second most seminal event in my life was becoming a music major. I got involved with the marching band at Pasadena High School only because my sisters in front of me had been on the drill team, and they had a really great band, which I loved to watch. I didn't play a band instrument at the time, but I joined the band. They made me a drummer because I had a pretty good sense of rhythm. And that really turned into a changing experience, life-changing experience for me. It was a really competitive, good band. We had a lot of camaraderie, and being in the band taught me much more than about making music, although that was a big part of it. It was about leadership and working together to achieve a goal, and working hard on something, perfecting what you were doing. And I think those are values that have stayed with me my whole life. And I was also mentored by our band director. She took me under her wing and made me the student director of the organization. So I got so much experience there. I actually left, and when I was headed for college, I was absolutely certain I was going to be a high school band director. It had changed my life. I thought if I could do the same thing for other kids and really be that kind of mentor to them, that would be a great life's work. So off I went to Cal State Long Beach as a music major, with absolute confidence that I was going to end up a high school band director.
So what happened? But there was a little left turn there in 1972 when you're in Long Beach.
When you go to school at Cal State Long Beach, one of the things all my friends down there ended up doing was getting weekend jobs at Disneyland, because it was pretty close by. A lot of them were playing in the bands in the parades or working on the Jungle Cruise or whatever. My roommate was a Jungle Cruise skipper in college. So off I went to apply for a job. I was sure I was going to be the next Jungle Cruise skipper or something cool like that, or at least a monorail pilot,
Right. Yeah.
But I went in for my interview, and they said, "We'd love to hire you. You're really tall, so you can reach the racks in the wardrobe department." And they put me in the wardrobe department, which was about the lowest grunt job you could get at Disneyland. I worked from 5 at night till 2 in the morning, literally putting away laundry. But it was magical to work at Disneyland in the summer at nighttime. Then the electrical parade had just started. The very first original electric parade was that summer. And it was a lot of fun. I spent more money on gas because I was commuting from Pasadena than I made $1.91.5 an hour. But I learned so much, and got some good opportunities, because while I was there, they realized that I was one of the only people around that could walk through the costume warehouse and say, "I know what that costume is. That's Practical Pig. That's Pfeiffer Pig. That's Maleficent." And being a Disney nerd, it was pretty obvious to me. But that led to them moving me down into the character department. I got to take care of the Mickey, Donald, and Goofy costumes, which I thought was just fantastic. In reality, stripping apart sweaty bear costumes is not the most common job in the world.
Not that glamorous, no.
It led me to be able to work on special events and do things like that. And it ultimately led to me being given the responsibility for costuming their big Christmas parade, which was called Fantasy on Parade back then. There was about 400 people in the parade.
Wow.
And I'd never done anything like that before, but I jumped in. I didn't know what a costume fitting was, to tell you the truth. And the great little ladies that worked in the alterations and costume department, who I had befriended, took me under their wing and showed me what to do. I snuck costumes into them because there wasn't much of a budget to remount this parade, and they were making new costumes for me under the table and repairing things. And So I did a pretty good job, I have to say. And that led me to getting promoted and getting an offer to be a full-time employee supervisor at Disneyland. So I quit school because I thought, boy, this is really amazing. So for $240 a week, yeah.
Were you able to pay for your gas at that point?
I think I moved to Anaheim by that point. I got an apartment. And that led to I ended up being hired with a position that they made up for me called costumer. I was the first costumer that Disneyland had for all of their entertainment shows. So I was responsible for all the parades, entertainment throughout the park, et cetera. And that was just when they were mounting, in addition to all the other regular shows, they were mounting the Bicentennial Parade in 1975, which was called America on Parade. You may remember it, the big giant.
Big-headed
but it was a major costume parade, a big feat to get all of those costumes produced, both for Disneyland and Walt Disney World. And that was my responsibility, working with the senior designer who designed all the costumes. And so that ultimately led me to Walt Disney World as well. And they made me assistant designer in charge of entertainment at Walt Disney World. And so I was going back and forth from Florida to LA, and really got a fantastic exposure to not only all things Disney, but a lot of basics of entertainment. I didn't work for the entertainment division, but I was exclusively dedicated to them. So they treated me as if I was one. I got to start brainstorming on parade concepts and things like that with Barnett Ritchie and some of those folks. Marilyn Magnus, Larry Billman, some of you may know those names.
Yeah, we saw one of the photographs. I said to Ryan, that's like the who's who of, theme park live entertainment.
Yeah.
And that's when I met Ron Miziker, working on the Bicentennial Parade, because he was the producer. Ultimately, the head of entertainment there was that's the Bicentennial show that was done for the LA City Schools in the LA Coliseum. I was given the job to costume about 50,000 high school kids that performed in that show. Yes, I said that right. You can see me there in the back center with the arrow pointing to me. But yeah, there's a lot of people there. Roy Lutheringer, Larry Billman, Ron Schwartz, Bob Yanni's in there, Jim Christensen, head of music for Disney, et cetera. It was quite a project for a one-night show. And if we had another hour, I would tell you lots of stories about that project in and of itself. Claire Graham is a name a lot of you may know too as well.
Oh yeah,
of course.
Fantastic. So I mean, and the guy that was responsible for all of Disneyland Entertainment, whose name was Bob Yanni. A lot of people know Bob's name. He invented the electrical parade. He really took Disney entertainment to a new level. Bob believed strongly in mentoring young people and giving them opportunities and developing young talent. And even though I wasn't working for entertainment, he put me in that group too, which I am forever grateful for. He saw me, recognized me. And I have to say that if there's one thing I want to talk to everybody about today, it's the difference it can make when someone who's experienced in the business can see someone young and say, I see you, you have talent, you can do this, you can make a difference. It absolutely changed my life to have some meaningful people do that to me. And that's the greatest gift we can pass on to those that come behind us and help them as well. And that's what Bob did for me. I still have notes that he sent me who didn't even work for him, just thanking me and telling me I did a good job that meant so much to me. And so it convinced me that I really wanted to stay in this industry and work in themed entertainment. But I also realized I didn't really have the background I probably would want to do what I wanted to do. So I made a really tough decision, and I quit my job at Disneyland after 8 years and went back to Art Center to get a thorough design background education. I chose illustration on the advice of the costume designer, Jack Muse, that was my mentor in the costume department, because it was the thing that would give me the most articulate visual vocabulary. Whether or not I ended up an illustrator wasn't the point. I wanted to be able to express myself and express visual concepts in the clearest possible way. So that's what I did. And while I was at Art Center working hard as a student, I also was freelancing building puppets, because when I moved into the character department, I started taking costume courses at Cal State Long Beach and anywhere else I could, but I also started studying puppetry because it was kind of related to character costumes.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of
exactly.
learning that went both ways. I brought stuff from puppetry into the character department, and I brought stuff that I learned from building the Disney characters to building puppets. So I did a lot of freelance work on the weekends, building puppets for commercials. And that led to, yeah, those are puppets I made for a Gay Men's Chorus concert. And that's Dave Cobb and Lily Tomlin. You may
Oh my
recognize.
gosh.
Yeah,
This is
that was the show with Lily.
That's like,
Um,
yeah.
so while I was art center, the puppeteer I'd been working for is a very talented guy named Tony Urbano. Tony had been called by Sid and Marty Krofft to become the creative director. They were going to make a comeback. Sid and Marty Krofft, you may know, are the television producers that produce HR Puffin stuff, Lidsville, all of that kind of stuff. And they wanted to go back into television production, and they were going to open a new production facility, and they wanted to have a full-time puppet shop to produce puppets for the shows they were going to do. So Tony asked me if I was interested in coming on board to manage and run that puppet shop, the fabrication department for him, which I did. So I quit Art Center before I got finished there. I was 4 terms in, and went and built puppets full-time for about 2.5 years. And we built puppets for television shows and commercials and things like that. Plus, I got to explore the basement of their production facility, which was where all of the old Lidsville costumes were, and everything. And Rolf Rudiger was the old puppet maker that used to made most of those, who was still around and working in the puppet shop. And so that's another legend I got to meet.
Where was that? You're in like Burbank?
Yeah, right by the Burbank Airport. Right
cool.
by where Wet is now. There's a shoe outlet in that building, but yeah, that's where it was.
Oh, cool.
So
this is 1981, 82, 83.
Yeah, somewhere in there. Yeah, 82, I'd say.
Okay.
When that kind of all fell apart. Oh, by the way, one of the things Sid, Marty, and Tony did was they wanted to develop puppeteers, so they put together a school for puppeteers and auditioned people to get into it. Most of the puppeteers working in Hollywood today, or a lot of the ones that are now old, came through that puppet class, but also people like Adam Bizark were in that class.
right.
And Adam I'd known from Disneyland, so it's another one of those things. I always say there's only 8 people in our industry, and we keep running into each other over and over again. Adam's one of those. So when that all ended, though, I went back to work for Bob Yanni, who had left Disneyland by that time. Bob went and became president of Radio City Music Hall in New York, doing the Christmas Spectacular. I built props for the Christmas Spectacular there, and was the creative consultant on the Christmas show when he brought it back.
Wow.
But he was also doing the Nativity show at the Glory of Christmas Nativity show at the Crystal Cathedral in Orange County, asked if I would come in and be sort of prop master for that. It was a spectacle show with 300 people, and every night the procession with camels and everything. There you see me taking care of all the props. And it was just something to do, but it actually led me back to working for Bob again. Coming right out of that, we did the Super Bowl in I think it was 1982, 83. And then Bob had been contracted by Disney to come in and produce the opening ceremonies of the 1984 Olympics, because many people don't know this, but originally Disney had agreed to produce the opening and closing ceremonies for that Olympics. It's a very long story, but at some point, Card Walker and Disney decided they didn't want to do that anymore. They backed out. And so when I had already been hired by the Olympic Committee at that time, I was the first ceremonies employee for the 84 Olympics. And so when Disney left, I was kind of left standing there when David Walper came in as commissioner of ceremonies and producer. And I got to continue and ended up being production supervisor in charge of all the props and wardrobe and physical production. That's a picture of me with Philip Glass, the composer on the right there, who wrote the music of the Torch. That was the day we timed a runner on the track so he would know how much music to write for the Torch run before it went up the steps of the carousel and light lit the torch. So, and that's Rick Birch, who was director of production, who many people may know. Rick, who went on to do many Olympics after LA in '84.
Is that a members only jacket you were wearing?
Probably. This is a time machine after all, right?
That's right.
After all, yes.
No to fashion.
So working on the Olympics in '84 was a high point of my life, still one of the high points of my life, because we went in, we had a pretty minuscule budget, relatively speaking. It was about $12 million for the opening and closing ceremonies combined. Nowadays, it's in the 200 million range and things. But the LA Olympics just didn't have any money, and we were told that going in. We had to cut every deal the best we could make it, etc. There was lots of doomsaying about what a disaster it would be, how much traffic there would be, the ceremonies would never work. And if you'd been at the dress rehearsal, you might have even felt that was true, because it was very chaotic to get everything pulled together. But as most people know, when the ceremonies happened, it was a magical day. Everything came off like clockwork. It was very upbeat and positive, and it set the Olympics off. And it was a glorious 2 weeks in LA. And to be part of that was pretty fantastic. Of course, the day after the opening ceremonies, we had to turn around and say, now we've got a closing ceremonies to do. And they actually brought in a new choreographer the day after the opening ceremonies to restage the closing ceremonies, which hadn't been staged at that point. There was very little put together. And the best story of all about the Olympics is there was a flying saucer in the closing ceremonies.
Yeah, we just
and that was a Dan Flannery, Bob Gurr creation. But on their first test flight of this structure that was actually lifted by a helicopter, it took off, and in midair, the whole thing folded, and it was called the Flying Taco. And with a week remaining, they had to completely re-engineer and rebuild the thing. And there was no time to fail at that point. And they did it. It was pretty magical. So fantastic experience.
Yeah. Wow.
So now we're moving on. It's 1985, and you're back with Bob.
I went back to work for Bob. Yeah. And about that time, we were doing some big industrial shows. Ford Taurus reveal and things like that. But Bob also had a dream to build his own theme park. He had acquired the theme park rights for the Beatrix Potter stories. And really wanted to build a lovely little park in the northern part of England. And I worked with him on that for the better part of a year or so. And Bob was putting together quite the team. I don't think he had the best business plan for it all. And maybe it was never going to be something that could have come to fruition. But while I was working on it, he brought in this guy named Herb Ryman to help conceptualize what things look like. And so I got to meet Herbie and work with him there. Somehow I ended up laying out all the rides. And at that point, I didn't have a clue about how to lay out a ride, other than I was a nerdy kid that wanted to know really bad. And I can remember vividly sitting in a meeting in Bob's office with Herbie and a couple other guys named Richard and Robert Sherman, who were going to write the music for the park. And we all sat around and I got to be a fly on the wall to listen to all of those folks talk about conceptualizing a new theme park and what that might be like. So,
cool.
One of those pinch yourself moments.
Wow.
That's awesome. So 1986, you worked with the Lee Iacocca event.
They were Statue of Liberty was hitting its centennial. They remodeled the statue and they wanted to stage a huge celebration in New York City called Liberty Weekend. And they thought the best way to do it, since LA Olympics had been such a success, was to put that band back together. So they called David Walper and the rest of the team, including Tommy Walker, who was with us in the Olympics in '84. Tommy was the original director of entertainment at Disneyland and a really colorful guy as well. And we got to go to New York and spend about a year there putting together a whole week of celebrations. And this is me. And if you know Mark Shoemate in the lower left there.
Oh my gosh, yes. Wow.
And that's Karen. I don't remember Karen's last name at the time, but she married Chip Largeman. And Chip Largeman was the production supervisor on the Statue of Liberty show on Liberty Island. That's Jeff Ernstoff, who was in charge of the music, and a sound designer named Tom Durrell in the check shirt, who's no longer with us. But we are up in the crown of the Statue of Liberty right there. That is the night before the statue opened to the public. We were some of the first people to get to go and visit the newly redone statue at about 1 o'clock in the morning the night before it reopened, which was pretty magical.
Wow.
That's so cool. So now,
And it
Phil,
got- Yeah. Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say, and working in New York got me a chance to spend a year and a half in New York. And if I wasn't a theater geek, which I was before that, I lived at the Marriott Marquis in Times Square and was able to go see
my
theater
gosh.
almost every night of that year when I got done with what I was doing during the day. So
Right. Well, wait, tell us about the 100 dancing Elvises at the Liberty event.
that was one of the big closing ceremony of Liberty Weekend was a stadium show at Meadowlands Stadium in New Jersey. And it had a cast of thousands and an incredible cast of celebrities. It's Shirley MacLaine, Liza Minnelli, Elizabeth Taylor. I can't name them all. You name it.
Frank Sinatra, right?
Sinatra was at the Liberty Island show, or the government show. Angela Lansbury did the show in Central Park. I mean, it was a who's who, but one of the pieces of the closing show, which was a big spectacular, was thank you, Karen Hobel Largemont. Thanks. Anyway, one of the big production numbers was sort of a survey of American pop music, and there was a whole Elvis Presley number, and there were 100 dancing Elvises that came up on the field, and the media had a field day with that, and it was where it would have been great in LA. New York didn't quite know what to do with 100 dancing Elvis.
Was it young Elvis or old Elvis?
It was jumpsuit Elvis. So.
Oh my God, that's crazy! Wow, I'm sure there's a big story about how you cast 100 Elvises, just finding them.
All right. So 1987, we're at Harvard University in Boston.
Left New York and spent 3.5 months in Boston putting on a show for Harvard University's 350th anniversary with Tommy Walker. Tommy was a real character and talk about somebody who had entertainment in his heart. He originally brought fireworks to Disneyland and was director of entertainment. Tommy's father was V.C. Walker, who was the first director of the Disneyland band. If you remember, he was a true John Philip Sousa kind of band director, and he was the guy that would lead the Disneyland band down the street. And Tommy was the original Tommy Trojan at USC, and just had an unbelievable sense of showmanship, et cetera. Getting to work with Tommy was another real joy of my life. He was about 3 times larger than life, and just lots of fun to be around.
So in 1988, you get a phone call from our friend Dan Flannery. What is this about?
Well, I mean, I left Boston and didn't have a clue about what I was going to do, didn't have a gig, and they weren't going to do another Olympics anytime soon. And just Dan happened to call me and said, you want to hang out sometime? I'd love to show you what I'm doing over at Universal. And he took me over to Universal, and he had a drive-on clearance, and he also had a garage door opener that would open the door to King Kong and things like that. So he'd worked on some of those things and wanted me to see what he was doing. And we were just hanging out and being buddies. And about a month after that, he called and said, hey, Universal needs a show producer. They got a new show they're trying to mount, and they're looking for somebody. I think you'd be perfect, da 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 da. And I wasn't really a show producer at that time. I'd done a lot of production, but it was usually on the physical production end. But I went for the interview, ultimately got David Walper to write a letter of introduction, but it took about 3 months for them to decide they were going to hire me. And it was a show that only had 7 months to get built. So by the time they hired me, we only had about 5 months left. And that was for a Rambo show at Universal that was going to replace the old A-Team stunt show at Universal. And on the day I started at Universal Planning and Development, which it was called back then, there were 5 employees: Barry Upson, Larry Lester, Bob Ward, Molly Rose, and I'm leaving one. Maybe that was it. Actually, I was number 5.
You were number 5.
I talked to Molly. Molly was Raleigh Crump's ex-wife, by the way, but Molly was a real stalwart in the early days of Universal, kind of on the business side. But I said, hi, I'm glad to meet you. Welcome. She said, welcome. Boy, do you have your work cut out for you. And I said, well, why is that? We have a show to mount. We have a lot of work to do, but the script's ready. We know what we have to do. And she says, oh, haven't you heard? On Friday, they threw out the script. You're starting over again. And literally was told on the first day I started that I had 1 week with Mike McHugh, who was the art director they'd brought on. Mike was a pretty genius guy. We had 1 week to redo that show and pitch it to management. So we managed to do it, even though Jay Stein, the head of planning and development, came in and made me pitch it a day earlier than I was expecting to.
And it's still a Rambo show at this point.
It was a
right?
Rambo show.
Okay.
And we worked on that for about a couple months, actually, or 6 weeks at least. And one day Jay came in and said to me, Phil, you need to sit down.
Never a good start.
It's not going to be a Rambo show anymore. What could you do with Miami Vice? And they literally threw out Rambo, said, we can do Miami Vice. And the show was supposed to open in June. This was now sometime in March, I think.
That's insane.
And so we just did a quick pivot. We had demoed the A-Team show. It was a flat piece of ground. And I literally went out with our PA and we traced out the shape of the lagoon with chalk dust, which is the same thing that they did for the Jungle Cruise at Disneyland, by the way.
Harper Goff.
Legendary story about Harper Goff and a stick going out and tracing the lagoon, making big. But we traced it out with chalk and just said to the contractor, dig 6 feet deep down there and we'll get back to you with the engineering of the sides of the lagoon and the lake and all that stuff. And it was that fast. And I have to say, I'm very proud of that because it was a pretty fantastic show that we got it on its feet in about 5.5 months. We opened it. It ended up opening on July 4th. So we were about 2 weeks behind where they were hoping, but it was, and that is where Waterworld sits today with the same lagoon.
Right. Oh, wow. Yeah.
But
cool.
This was it was a pretty great show with the.
Yeah, I remember that show. That's awesome. So you were kind of the only creative guy at Universal at the time?
Well, everybody else was busy working. Oh, Peter Alexander, I'm sorry, was another one of the first.
Okay.
Bob and Peter and everybody, Barry, were all focused on the plans for the new park in Orlando. And so that's why they threw Miami Vice at me and said, we'll see you in 5 months. And when Miami Vice opened and it was pretty successful, they actually brought me on full-time as director of attractions for Universal Hollywood while they were still all in Florida. And that actually led to me being the producer on Back to the Future, because Back to the Future was originally slated to appear in Hollywood before it got to Florida. So I did a lot of the early development work on Back to the Future, which was a great experience. All we knew about it kind of going in was it was going to be an Omnimax dome, it was going to be a motion base, and everything else from that point kind of got changed as they went along and developed.
Wow.
Incredibly innovative. And I remember the moment everybody who saw that movie wanted to be in the DeLorean. Wanted to ride the DeLorean. And that was the magic of that ride, that you guys figured out how I got to ride in the DeLorean. I wasn't in some big theater. And that was like, brilliant. And thinking back that you did it without CG. All practical model work.
So there's two really great stories about that in my mind. Is one, we didn't really know what a dome. Nobody had done a simulator in a dome. They'd done single screen kind of things. So we needed to test that. So we found an Omnimax dome in Vancouver, British Columbia, that wasn't being used at a science center up there. And we leased that dome and we built a platform in the middle of it and put a motion base that could be joystick controlled and driven in the floor of that. No other control system, no pre-recorded controls on it. You could just joystick it around. And I went to Rhythm and Hues, which was literally a few guys with a computer in a tiny little shop at the time when they were first getting started. But we rendered up a bunch of cityscapes that were in wireframe and quick shade rendering, just blocks, and we drove the camera through it in all kinds of different ways, including backwards, just for the hell of it, because we could.
Yeah.
And then had those rendered out at Omnimax frame size and projected on the dome and then joystick the car. And that's where we really realized we could make moves with this car that nobody had expected you could do, including moving forward and then backing up again, which is one of the coolest effects that we ended up doing. Even with that, there were a lot of problems in the early stages of trying to make that movie, because it was originally going to be tried to shot with live plates and some comping in of things, et cetera, from a helicopter. Which not only would just not have been very interesting, but there were jitter issues and focus issues and everything. And Sherry McKenna, who was putting together all of the media for the Orlando park, said that this is never going to work. And she called her friend Doug Trumbull. Doug said, I think I can figure that out. And Doug Trumbull came in and by God figured it out. And that entire movie, that entire simulator film was shot with models and miniatures. And the resolution, because of the Omnimax of these models had to be so big that they were like block long models that they would fly through with the motion control camera in a huge old factory in Housatonic, New York, that they took over. It was, I mean, nobody would ever do it that way because now we can do it in CGI, but there was no CGI at that level at all back then. It all had to be done with effects. And Doug Trumbull just was a genius, and just took it and ran with it. So,
so that opened in May of '91, and then it sounds like you got to start imagining what might be a sister park to Universal Studios Florida.
I have to give Jay Stein credit. Jay Stein, the head of Universal Entertainment for many years, had quite a reputation for being the ultimate screamer and yeller, very much in the Universal Studios fashion, by the way, because Steinberg, Lou Wasserman, all of them could raise the roof pretty well, and Jay was no exception. But and even though when Universal Orlando opened, it had a lot of problems. It was a very tough opening because a lot of the rides didn't work and everything. I think from day one of that park opening, Jay was convinced that there needed to be a second park in Orlando. They had bought enough land to do that. And he started us off and me off on working on a second gate concept while they were still in these nightmare of trying to open this park and get it to function and would it be a success. But Jay believed in it 100%. And I have to say, everybody needs to know there would never be a Universal Orlando if it wasn't for Jay Stein and his absolute 100% commitment to making that happen, because Sid Sheinberg didn't want to do it. Lou Wasserman didn't want to do it. He had to find a joint venture partner and they still didn't really want to do it, but they let him do it. And now look at what Universal theme parks have become. And that is 100% due to that persistence of Jay Stein and his belief that we could make that happen. And one of the real things I'm most proud of in my life is to be part of the small group that I think took Universal from sort of being an also ran backlot studio tour to the first leg of what's now become a real empire of the theme park world.
Worldwide.
So how did you even start thinking about what would be a second gate?
Well, Jay had decided that the second gate should be squarely targeted at the Disney audience. The original Universal Park was really much more teenage focused, and it had, Universal Parks had the reputation of things blowing up real good and being about girls and things like that. But he really wanted to take on the Disney audience there. So something that would have a strong family component to it and kid component. So he had decided that this park would be called Cartoon World. And he handed to me, he said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make a deal with Warner Brothers. We're going to get their properties, Looney Tunes and DC Comics. We're going to get Dr. Seuss, and we're going to get a bunch of other comic strips, and we're going to make a great land out of a park out of all of that. And then he basically said, go. I was given the task to take that and start taking those ingredients. Nothing had been developed. So we got to put together a little skunk works with Dale Mason, my creative partner, and in my mind, maybe the most brilliant theme park designer around today. And Dale and I got to put together a little skunk works of less than 10 people in the back of Universal Planning and Development, where no one else could go, not even the management. And so we got to have our little skunkworks back there. And Wes Cook is another genius illustrator, old time. Nobody in the world other than Herbie Ryman could draw like Wes Cook, was on our team. Scott
Wow.
Sherman.
Was there someone named Diane? I remember Diane, blonde woman.
Diane, there was Helen.
Helen, that's what I meant.
Was a
Helen.
fantastic colorist. But we
Yeah.
just started on it, and first thing so the concepts we developed, especially for Looney Tunes Land, I think were some of the best concept work that's ever been done. They're sitting in a drawer somewhere at Universal probably. And we were well into it, both on the DC stuff. Gary Goddard, who worked a lot for Universal, took the lead on most of the DC stuff. But we did all of Looney Tunes and also Dr. Seuss and Toon Lagoon. And one day Jake came in and said, no Warner Brothers. There was a fight between Sid Steinberg and Terry Semel, and the deal got scotched. And so all of that, about 2 years of spec work, just got put in the drawer. And then the question was, now what do? We still have to have a theme park design. What properties could we get? What could we build it around?
Right.
We still didn't have Dr. Seuss, but we were hopeful we would be able to get that. I think Gary suggested Marvel as a replacement for DC, and I'll give Gary credit for that. And at the time, Marvel was nothing. There was no Spider-Man movie. There was no nothing. You know, there had been a Spider-Man Saturday morning TV show and Fantastic Four.
Spider-Man.
And we knew we had Jurassic Park, which was originally going to go into the other Orlando park. And we just started, what could we do? And so we thought, what if we created this world where you were going on a vacation through all of these different kinds of adventures? So, and we made them islands. I'm short-circuiting a long conversation here. So, and we ended up creating a whole island out of whole cloth, which was Myths and Legends, because kind of the demo mix we wanted needed that hunk filled. So we added that to it, and went forward with that. I think Norm Newberry, fantastic art director that we lost last year, actually came up with the name Islands of Adventure as we were trying to name the park. But it turned into what it is. So we finished the Seuss drawings and plans. There's a couple people you might recognize, Dale Mason in the middle, and Scott Trowbridge, now a Star Wars maven extraordinaire at Disney, and myself at Islands not long before opening. So we pitched Seuss to, well, we could not get the Seuss estate to come even take a meeting to buy to give us approval. We finally got the literary agent that handled the publishing for Seuss to come down to Orlando, and we put on a major dog and pony show. And at the end of the meeting, he literally got on his cell phone and called Audrey Geisel, who was Dr. Seuss's widow, and said, I think you need to come see this. Because Spielberg had tried to call her, they wouldn't take a call, nothing. But once he saw the work, he got Audrey down there, or we went and met with Audrey, and Dale and I pitched everything to that. And she said, can you really do this? And we said, yes, we can. And she signed it, and it was a love affair from that point.
That's awesome.
So we got Seuss, and then we just proceeded with designing the rest of it. And the rest is somewhat history.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was your favorite mock-up story?
We did a lot of crazy mock-ups for that project, including the waterfall and Ripsaw Falls and everything. But my favorite one was for the Incredible Hulk, which is a pretty great, simple concept. You know, pairing a ride system with a story. You're going to get hit with gamma rays, and you're going to turn into a raging monster and go catapulting. But nobody had ever built a coaster that could do that with an accelerated start on an incline, especially it went over into a 90-degree roll immediately. So there were a lot of technical issues about how fast did we have to go, et cetera. And we knew how many G's we thought you'd want to get to have a good sense of acceleration, and probably what it would take to engineer the right amount of acceleration that we need for the ride. But we had to test it. So we literally welded 2 cargo containers together, put a track in the floor of them. And on that track, we took a go-kart with wheels that would move on that track. Then we hoisted the whole thing up on a steel structure at about 45-degree angle that we calculated was what we need to do. And so it was sitting in air. And then we took that go-kart, put a pin in it on the bottom and ran a cable up over a shiv and tied it to a bunch of railroad car tires that were real metal steel tires that were real heavy, railroad wheels. And they would, when you drop them, they would land in a stack of hay bales, so they didn't hit the ground too hard. But literally, so we would back this whole thing up, cock the golf cart, get in it, put a helmet on, and pull the pin. And it was calculated to say that's 1 G or 1.5 Gs of energy. And it would stop when the wheels hit the hay bales. And then there was we put a crude anti-rollback system so you wouldn't go all the way back down to the tunnel. But that's how we figured out that that was all going to work. But I think my back is still sore from the rollback.
I was gonna they have a chiropractor on site.
So during the 14 years you were at Universal, you went through many ownerships, right? And
Universal was started with MCA, Sid Sheinberg, Lou Wasserman. They sold it to Matsushita, which was Panasonic, who sold it to Seagram's, who sold it to Vivendi. And every time they sold the company, senior management would change. The theme park division was the stepchild. We always had to re-educate everybody about how the theme park business worked and what it cost to maintain the attractions. And it got really old. I mean, really hard for me anyway, personally. And just, we weren't going to build another major theme park anytime soon, even though Islands was successful. What they wanted to spend in the meantime in Hollywood and elsewhere, the budgets were getting smaller and smaller and expecting higher and higher clicks at the gate. And it's like, this is just, this is tough with the new management and all. And I got really tired and I thought, I need to go do something else. I'm not happy to come into work every day. I'm not doing my best work. That's not fair for Universal. It's not fair for me. So I just quit. I said, I'm done. And didn't know what I was going to do. I literally thought about going back to school or going to film school or doing something else. And
2001, we are right now.
I'm sorry?
We're in 2001 right now. When this is happening.
So I was just kind of tooling around and I got a call from somebody that said, I'm from Jeffrey Katzenberg's office. Oh, I left out the whole Jeffrey Katzenberg story, but anyway, I got to know Jeffrey through Stephen because we worked together on a private party for a project of Stephen and Jeffrey's called Dive, which was a submarine sandwich restaurant in Hollywood.
Century City.
And I really enjoyed working for Jeffrey. He's, in my mind, one of the best bosses around because you never have any doubt as to where you stand. You present something to him and he says, I love that. I hate that. That's a home run. Do something else. So I got his call and it says, this is Jeffrey's office. We got a call about a project. It's not what we do, but Jeffrey thought you would be great at doing it. And I didn't have a company. I didn't have nothing. And it turned out it was the King of Jordan was calling and he had a project that he wanted to do. And I didn't even know where Jordan was, to tell you the truth. So a couple of weeks later, I got a call and it says, yes, I'm from the Royal Court of Jordan. His Majesty has this project. Would you be interested? I said, well, yes, but I understand I don't have a company. Then I said, no, it's okay. So he told me a little about the project. They sent me the brief, which was literally a half-page typed piece of paper. That was the whole thing. And I put together a little white paper about how we would approach it. They had this piece of land they wanted to develop in Aqaba that wanted to feel like it was a city that had been there for 1,000 years, et cetera. So sent it off thinking I'll never hear from them again. Literally 2 months go by, I get a call and they said, can you be in Amman, Jordan on Friday, like in 3 days? And so I called a buddy of mine who kind of was more on the business side, and my good buddy, Terry Palmer, some of you may know, is a fantastic area development master planner. And we got on a plane for Amman, Jordan, one-way tickets, no contract, without any idea about what was really going on. We all thought it was an interview, basically. We get there, long story short, we meet the prince, we meet the Minister of Finance. They put us in a helicopter the next day and fly us all over Jordan to see all of the major architectural sites as research. including through the Valley of Petra.
That's mind blowing.
I really want to do that.
Amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
And then we literally got to meet the king, and he wanted to develop this project. And the king has to stay away from projects from actually developing them, but he can put seed money into the creative piece of it. So that's what he was paying for. And we spent a couple of years developing that project. Got to work with Ahmad Jafari, who you see there in the middle of that picture. And they sent us all over the Middle East. This is actually in Yemen. I think we're at the fish market in Yemen there, but Yemen is one of the most amazing places on the planet. Nothing like any place you've ever seen, kind of like Tunisia is. But we went to Damascus, we went to Dubai, of course. We went to, well, all over the place, Morocco. So what a fantastic experience in getting to meet the folks. And John Kasperowicz, who you see to my left there, was a big part of that. Jerry Pera, there's Terry Palmer on the right, Ahmad, George Victor on the left side of the picture, starting to do the planning for that project. So that was a great project. It got built not exactly the way we wanted. The developers that finally built it did their own thing, but getting to do the development and the huge concept model we did for it that we took to Dubai and put on display was all great stuff.
So it sounds like this kicked off the Hettema Group.
That really was the start of what was then Phil Hettema and Associates. And then we ultimately became the Hettema Group. That led to the National World War II Museum and Beyond All Boundaries, which I was involved in pitching the original concept of the expansion in a competition. And as part of that, we took on the theater show that Tom Hanks executive produced and was very successful. This is on opening day of that show. That's my dad on the right, who was a B-17 pilot and kind of was the spirit of the show, working with him. And we took him up in a B-17 so he could tell us the stories about what he remembered from flying. He flew 35 missions over Germany. And on that day, we happened to meet Jay Leno at the airport, who is anxious to hear my dad's stories. And that was pretty cool as well. So fantastic experience working with the World War II Museum. We're working with them to do another theater right now that'll be open in about a year. And then that led to other projects, beyond One World Observatory in New York, the observatory at the World Trade Center. We also did, the high roller in Las Vegas, et cetera. So been so lucky to get to do a really wide and diverse range of projects. Contrary to opinion, we don't just do tall projects. Even though that's the tallest observation wheel in the world, or at least it was at the time.
We just did the Crystal Lobby in Macau, right?
Yeah, we did a big project at the Galaxy Resort in Macau, which involved about 500,000 pieces of hand-cut European crystal and that many programmable LED lights, all in this beautiful gazebo and articulated dome at the top of the lobby, all programmed. But the most impressive thing about that project is we did the whole thing without ever setting foot on the site. Because of COVID, we couldn't get it into the country. So we had, the design was complete. We had everything shipped in. I had to hire local labor, brief them virtually, and even program the lighting virtually, looking through video cameras and everything. But it's open and running, and it's quite spectacular and beautiful.
Well, and I think that's a great example of kind of the thread through all the projects you've done with your company, Phil, is that, okay, there's a Ferris wheel, there's elevators, but you always challenge yourself and the world to take it to the next level.
Make an experience.
Yeah.
Well, I always think our clients come to us, there's a lot of places they can go to buy a roller coaster or a Ferris wheel. There's Macau, the lobby there. But what is it that we can bring that makes it unique and different and memorable for the audience? Because that's really at the heart of what we do. It's how do we create those memorable experiences that become sort of milestone experiences in people's lives. And that's what we get to do. That's the great blessing and joy of, I think, this industry that nobody else gets to do. We create things like that on a daily basis. And if we're not doing something if we're just doing the same thing that you just saw down the street or at the other theme park around the corner, then why, we always need to be finding not only something new, it doesn't always have to be new or different. It just has to engage the audience in some way they don't expect and touch them in a way that is memorable for them.
Yeah. So what's in the future for Phil Hettema? You got that great novel in you. You're going to make that Oscar-winning motion picture.
We'll see. As you may know, we just merged with Theme Space. We're really thrilled to be the new, bigger and better THG. We've got twice as many people working now. We're all really busy and have a whole fantastic slate of projects in front of us. And, you know, I'm not getting any younger, so I want to focus on those things that really bring me joy and feel like they're creatively challenging and exciting opportunities. And we got a handful of those right now. So I'm sure no matter what happens, that's what I'm never going to be bored.
And you had mentioned earlier on about the power of mentoring, and maybe you want to talk just a little bit about your work with the Ryman Foundation, which is all about that.
Well, I don't think there's anything more important we can do than to help those coming behind us take a step forward. And I'm fortunate enough, I got familiar with Ryman Arts, which was started by a bunch of Herb Ryman's friends when Herbie passed away, that provides free art instruction to high school kids across Southern California. And I've been involved with them for years, but have been on their board for maybe 8, 9 years now, and have been the president of the board for the last 3, 4 years. And I'm so proud of what the organization does in, sorely needed art, really high level art education that challenges kids. And it's just like when I was in high school band, it's all about the art, but it's also about learning leadership and responsibility and having assignments that you've got to put on the board and defend. So it's speaking skills and self-confidence. We're giving all that to about 700 kids a year in that program. And that's a big deal. And I feel lucky to be able to be part of all of that. So
it's an amazing organization, amazing work you're doing. And I would encourage anybody who's watching this, you're not familiar with it, definitely go and check it out for sure.
Yeah. And Phil, where do you think we're going? Everybody's talking about the metaverse and VR and AR. What's the Hettema take on all this?
Being an old guy that's seen a lot of cycles of the latest thing, it's, there was a time when simulation was going to be the new be all and end all of our industry, and we were just going to build black boxes and change the simulation out. Well, that didn't work out so well. I think the same thing. Simulation is a great tool. We still use it. It's important. The same thing is true of VR and AR. I think AR is going to happen sooner. We're already seeing it at Universal doing great things with AR. That'll happen sooner, but ultimately VR is going to be a big part of our toolbox. I think it absolutely will be, but it's not going to change the basics of what we do, which is really creating experiences that make people relate with each other, because VR can be a very cold and singular place too, and that doesn't work over the long term so well. Our attractions work best when they make us connect with each other. That's really heart and soul. I'm going to jump to your big question at the end, because
what makes the guest experience
and I think that's the secret sauce of what we do. People go, yes, to see the worlds that we create, but they want to go see it through the eyes of the people that they're with. And we relate to each other. It's like getting out of your everyday and being able to relate to people in a new way, to see things fresh, see how they react to it, see how we react and how we talk to each other. When you go on that roller coaster, how do you grab the person next to you? You're confronting life in a fictional life and death in some kind of metaphoric way, but you're doing it with people that are important to you. And that's why these experiences that we create become so important in our lives. It's like it was for me as a kid going to Disneyland every year. They change our lives, they change the way our imaginations work, and they change the way we experience each other. And that's as long as that's at the heart and soul of attractions that we develop and create, that's going to give us all something to do for decades and decades to come.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think Joe and I have to head off. Should we go see another one of Phil's amazing creations?
Which I'm going to go. We set the time machine for the opening of Islands of Adventure.
That would be awesome.
Okay, there we go.
Phil, thank you.
Seriously,
It's been a great ride.
Absolute pleasure having you here. with us today. What a fantastic dinner.
Yeah, it's
Thank you.
amazing.
Now, remember, we have our Q&A afterwards.
Yeah,
So
don't
those
go
who
to
want,
that.
those who want to spend some time with us and ask Phil all those questions, that I see some names popping up here on the
Yeah.
screen. So
All right.
stay with it.
Take care. Bye, everybody.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the ride today. Thank you so much to Phil Hettema for time traveling with us. If you have questions for Phil, stick around for an off-the-record Q&A in just 60 seconds. And on behalf of Zeitgeist Design Production, we thank you for spending an hour of your day with us on the Spirit of the Time Zoomcast. Please plan now to join us on Friday, September 16th, when our passenger will be former Disney Area Development Executive, the landscape architect of awesome Disney attractions like Expedition Everest, and co-author of the new book, The Women of Imagineering, Becky Bishop. So may your tomorrow have the nostalgia of the past, the wonder of the present, and the promise of the future. Thank you guys again for joining us. Stick around. We will be right back.
Get it.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great one. Stick around for the Q&A.